To complete the podcast for Chapter 14, we need to pick up with presidential character. The first president they discuss is Eisenhower. They see him as orderly, with a military style. He delegated his authority to trained specialists. The next is Kennedy, bold, articulate, amusing leader, improviser who bypassed traditional lines of authority. After him, Johnson, master legislative strategist, tended to micromanage himself. Nixon, definitely an expert in foreign policy, opened China for trade, disliked personal confrontation, and tried to centralize power in the White House. Ford, discussion-oriented and congenial. Decision structures not always coherent or organized. Carter, definitely a Washington outsider. He also tended to micromanage, which was his downfall. Reagan set policy priorities and then gave staff wide latitude. Felt very confident with the people that he chose, and he was definitely a leader of public opinion. George H.W. Bush, definitely a hands-on manager with considerable Washington experience. Clinton, good communicator, pursued liberal or centrist policies, which helped him get along with the Republican Congress in his second term. George W. Bush, tightly run White House. Agenda became dominated by foreign affairs following the 9/11 attacks. Really did not notice what was happening in the economy, or simply didn't think that it would falter as much as it did. Signed the first stimulus package to help the falling banks, which was TARP, approximately 1 month prior to his leaving office. Barack Obama, superb communicator, first African American elected to the presidency. He himself came to office amid a global economic crisis, has proposed the largest federal budget in history, and it passed. That was his first budget. Designed to forestall an economic depression, that was the reason for the budget and the stimulus package. Proposed a comprehensive health insurance program known as the Affordable Care Act, which also passed during his first term, and which gradually is going into effect. Okay, he's in his second term, and for the first time, we've seen a sequester, which is a result of the Gramm-Rudman 1985 Budget Deficit Reduction Act. The next section in your book is entitled The Power to Persuade. The president can use the office's national constituency and ceremonial duties to enlarge his powers. There are 3 audiences for the president's persuasive powers. First, his fellow politicians and leaders in Washington, D.C., and his reputation is very important for getting along with them. His second is partisan activists and officials outside Washington, D.C., which are the partisan grassroots, his own political party. And the last is the public, the general American public. He's having to talk to various public audiences with divergent views and interests. On the campaign trail, he speaks boldly about what he accomplishes or will accomplish. In office, he speaks quietly about problems that he will overcome unless he and Congress bat heads or come to heads with them. And last, presidents make few impromptu remarks and rely more on prepared speeches. They take advantage of what is known as the bully pulpit. In popularity and influence, the presidents try to transform popularity into congressional support for their programs. Presidential coattails have had a declining effect for years and are minimal in their influence today. Congressional elections are relatively insulated from presidential elections. We see weak party loyalty and organization, and congressional members' own strong relations with their constituents seems to be more important. Still, to avoid the political risks of opposing a popular president, Congress will pass more of that individual's legislative proposals. Popularity is affected by factors beyond anyone's control sometimes. For example, consider Bush's approval ratings immediately following the 9/11 attacks. But then as the economy started to slip, his approval ratings in his second term dropped drastically. Take a look at the charts from page 381 to 383. I think that will help you understand more. The decline in popularity. Popularity is highest immediately after an election. That's known as the honeymoon period. Usually there's a decay at midterm, with the president's party usually losing congressional seats in the midterm election. Here's one of the charts in your book. All right. Presidential victories on votes, partisan gains or losses in Congress and off-year elections, and presidential vetoes. We need to pick up with the power to say no, or the presidential veto. All right, we've gone over this significantly in class, so this should be pretty clear, so I'm going to do this really quickly. The veto message sent within 10 days of the bill's passage is a regular veto. Congress is in power. Congress is not adjourned. Congress is in session. A pocket veto, all right, is used only before Congress adjourns at the end of its second session. If Congress adjourns if Congress adjourns 10 days, within 10 days of the bill reaching the president's desk, then it will die just naturally. Okay, but Congress must adjourn. It can't happen in a session. In a recess session, it can only happen before Congress adjourns at the end of its second session. Congress will rarely override any vetoes. If a bill sits on a president's desk and Congress does not adjourn and he does not sign it or veto it, it naturally becomes law. Congress rarely overrides vetoes, and the president does not hold a line item veto. 1966, the reform was permitted to enhance rescissions, but the Supreme Court ruled the line item veto is unconstitutional based on language in the Constitution. Executive privilege is next. To define it as confidential communications between the president and advisors, and the belief is that it need not be disclosed. The justification for that is the separation of powers between the president and the rest of the government, and the need for the president to be able to give candid advice on particular issues. Your main case on executive privilege is U.S. versus Nixon, 1974, where the Supreme Court, for the first time, had to take on the issue of executive privilege. The issue that the court dealt with is, can a district court, which was the trial court, order the President of the United States to turn over information he considered to be privileged? What happened is that the President had in his possession tape recordings of conversations that the Watergate Special Prosecutor Leon Jaworski believed were needed in the trials of 7 men charged with conspiracy in the Watergate cover-up. The district court issued a subpoena duces tecum for the tapes. Nixon turned over edited transcripts of the tapes, alleging that the right of executive privilege was absolute, and that he, the president, not the judiciary, had the right to determine what could be released. The district court said that that executive privilege was not absolute, and determined that it was the right of the judiciary to ask for the tapes. Okay. The tapes effectively were eventually, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the subpoena and required the president to supply the tapes. So it rejected the claim of absolute executive privilege, not executive privilege, but absolute executive privilege. The only other time we see this happening is when Bill Clinton claimed in the Paula Jones episode that he did not have a relationship with Paula Jones, which was determined to be untrue. And in that particular situation, that really reduced the number of officials with whom the president can speak in confidence. So the whole idea of executive privilege is very weak. Impoundment of funds. The definition of this is presidential refusal to spend funds appropriated by Congress. Nixon impoundments were countered by the Budget Reform Act of 1974. That act says it requires the president to notify Congress of funds he does not intend to spend. Congress must agree in 45 days to delete them. Requires the president to notify Congress of delays in spending, and Congress may pass a resolution refusing the delay and requiring the immediate release of funds. The next are signing statements. Presidential statement issued at the time the president signs a bill. The purposes include express presidential attitudes about the law, and that's what the president would do. He says, these are the things I don't think are constitutional. Communicate to the executive branch how laws should be enforced or not enforced. Declare his belief that a portion of the law is unconstitutional. It became extremely common in the 20th century and was used very heavily by President Bush under the direction of Vice President Cheney. It was viewed by Congress as a type of unconstitutional line-item veto that blocks enforcement of the law. It is currently allowed by the Supreme Court because the court has not ruled directly on the practice. Next is the President's program. Resources in developing a program. Oh, wait, I'll go on to the next slide here. Resources in putting together the president's program or developing a program include interest groups, aides and campaign advisors, federal departments and agencies, and various specialists. There are some constraints on a president's program. The public opinion, and congressional reactions, limited time and attention span of the president, sometimes unexpected crises such as the 9/11 attacks get in the way. Most resources are already committed, so any programs that he has can be changed only marginally, and definitely public opinion polls. The presidential approach is very influenced by opinion polling. There are two types, the trustee model and the delegate model. The trustee model is do what the public good requires regardless of popular opinion, and the delegate model is do what your constituents want you to do. Almost every president since 1928 has proposed reorganization. What they mean by reorganization is changing the structure of the staff, departments, and agencies that are subordinate to the executive. Bush's reorganization was to accommodate the new Department of Homeland Security, which has become an example of long-standing practice. Reasons for reorganization: large number of agencies, easier to change policy through reorganization than by abolishing an old program or agency. Any reorganization outside the White House staff must be congressionally approved. I'm going to have to go on to another podcast to complete presidential transition, succession, and impeachment.